worship songs for us to consider which ones to do. I was brought to tears just reading the words. The guy is a poet for sure, and really in tune with what God's heart is. Well, how many of you have children that started school this morning or yesterday or tomorrow? Do I see the sighs of relief? Or is it still kind of, people aren't too sure if they're liking school yet? How many had any tears? Any tears? No? Well, cool. That's awesome. It's great to see you here. So as we're thinking about fall, fall in California is kind of like, is there fall in California? Since I grew up in Texas, when it's fall in Texas, it's like starting to cool off a little bit. And when it's fall in New York State. I lived there for 5-6 years, and the summers are gorgeous in upstate New York. They're just not to be beat. But the winters are, something else. It's not the white Christmases that are the problem. It's the white Easters. I told my mother, Mom, it's really beautiful here, but I'm tired of the of the white Easters. But no black patent shoes. No, get on the boots. But anyway, this is fall in California, and the children are going back to school, and this is the end of our study. So this is our last time, and so it's very exciting to me because I just feel that God has touched so many in a deep way that goes way beyond just reading something. I just believe through your efforts in prayer and reflecting on some of these things, God has really touched you in a special way. And I've talked with you, a couple of you, and you have confirmed that for me, so that makes me happy. So today we want to finish our seasons of abiding, and we have 2 fantastic stories, so I will only be up here about 15 minutes. We have some ladies here today who are going to share their stories of abiding in seasons of joy and seasons of challenge. Last week we saw that a fruitful harvest requires 4 seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter. And we talked about in a vineyard, you can't have a harvest without all the other. And you can't get ready for another season of growth without a winter. So today we're talking about 2 seasons of fall and winter. We're going to compare again the seasons in a vineyard to spiritual seasons in our life. In your books, there's a full explanation of all the seasons, and I am not going to cover spring and summer again because I know you can refer to your books and get that. But there's a full explanation about each season and how God cares for us and prunes us so that we'll bear the maximum amount of quality fruit. It glorifies God when we bear much fruit. This is what John 15 says repeatedly. Jesus repeats that. And remember that fruit is any attitude, word, or action that shows God's love and goodness to the world. And it can look different in different people's lives. You might be expressing that love to your family most because maybe you are focusing on raising children right now. I did struggle with being home with my kids because I was in ministry before I had my kids for 5 years. And I was used to social interaction. And then suddenly I was home. And there were no other adults to talk to. You could probably relate. And I didn't have a car, so we only had one car. So I was really at home. And my first one was born in Ithaca, New York, which is I just referred to about the beautiful seasons there. And when the snow fell, there you were. And so I really had to hash out, what's this all about, Lord? Why am I experiencing such distress when I should be joyful? I was joyful at the hospital, and my mom was nowhere near. And but anyway, the Lord began to impress on me because we had been in a ministry of making disciples. Campus Crusade, Navigators, those kinds of organizations evangelize and teach people the basics of faith. And that is what I had spent, all my time since college doing. And the Lord said to me, I really sensed in my quiet time one day, your first disciples are your children. And through your children, you can impact the world. And so keep your eyes on, your vineyard at home. And if you're faithful in what God has given you, someday He will probably entrust you with more, because that's what He judges on. How did you do with the little? So I began to think about my role as a mom completely different. All that to say that could be the kind of fruit you're bearing right now and that you are cultivating. It could be a job or a calling that you're involved with that requires faithfulness and perseverance. Developing your gifts and talents. It could be a season of growth and going back to school, or any number of ways that we develop our gifts and respond to what we feel God has called us to do. But fruit comes naturally as we learn to abide. It is not up to us to produce fruit. We are just the fruit bearers. So the Holy Spirit produces the fruit, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Galatians 5:22 and 23. Of course, it's a famous verse. And I used to have this dilemma thinking about the life of faith. Well, Lord, is this an active life or a passive life? Because it seems like mixed messages. We're going to have to obey, but we're supposed to abide. So which is it? And really, it's two sides of the same coin of life with Him. And Jesus says, abide in my love, remain in my love. And you're in my love when you obey. So the evidence of responding to Jesus' love is obedience. So it's really both. So I needed to cultivate faithfulness in my life when I was a young mom, and in every season, regardless of whether anybody saw you or gave you a pat on the back. And that was a great lesson of character for me. Okay, so in the fall, the fruit of the vines comes to maturity and sweetness, and that's sort of yes, everybody knows that. But in Jesus' day, the food reserves were all brought into harvest in 1 to 3 month period. They didn't all come in at once. The vineyards tended, each different crop comes in at a certain time. There's wheat, there's vineyards, there's other barley, different kinds of harvests. But that harvest provided the food for the community for a year. And it was all about how they preserved it and stored it. So this was a time of great excitement and anticipation for the farmers and for the people in Israel and everyone who lived in the first century. Because, hallelujah, we're going to have food for another year. It's not like us who can go to the supermarket. So in the harvest, in talking about the harvest in Scripture, harvest and joy are very closely tied together, because harvest time was a time of thanksgiving and celebration. And the Jews understood how to celebrate. They had not one, but 2 feasts of the harvest. They had the beginning of harvest, which was the first fruits, the Feast of Harvest. And then later on, they had the Feast of Ingathering, which signified the end of harvest. And the thing that is so cool about this, when you're an agrarian society, you really probably have a closer sense of God because you're in touch with His creation, and you know that you're not the boss of it, so you are humbled by when it's a great harvest. So the people would be very in a celebratory mood, and they would gather and celebrate. But the great thing was the Jews recognized it was God, not nature, not themselves, who provided for their next year to come. And that is a wise thing for us to do as well. In the vineyard, the hard work and perseverance of the farmer and the life-giving juices of the vine that provides what the branches and the fruit need to develop are the 2 things that come together in order to produce a fruitful harvest. This book, In Season, which a lot of the season material was taken from, Wayne Jacobson grew up on a vineyard. His father was the vineyard owner and the vineyard keeper, the head guy. He talks about bringing in the final harvest, like the last trailer of grapes. And what a joyful time it was. It sounds like they were just hooping it up as they rode in from the fields to the barn. Because it's hard work to harvest. You know, perhaps some people use machines now, but I think for a lot of vineyards it's still a lot of handwork. When we visited a harvest time vineyard back maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we went to a talk on, viticulture, raising grapes, and, it was sponsored by a winery, but you didn't have to drink wine to go. But I went because this passage has been inspiring me for so many years. I thought, I want inspiration from the real thing, just like when people go to Israel. I want the real thing. So so we were supposed to be there real early. Like my husband said, are you sure? So we had to be there at 8. And as we drove in, other people were arriving for the lecture. The hugest trucks driving in, packed full of grapes. I mean, they were I'm thinking, gosh, the day's only starting. What's the deal here? And the person giving the lecture explained to us, somebody said, what's the deal with these trucks? It's so early in the morning. And he said, we determined yesterday that one more day in the sun would ruin these grapes. So we had to work all night to get every grape harvested and into the barns because it couldn't take one more day of sun. So that's how urgent a harvest is. And sometimes I believe it's that way in our life. If we're racing to the finish line of some great project or some great endeavor that we have felt God call us to, often there is a sense of, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel and I need to persevere in order to reach that goal. So in the vineyard, it is that way, and I believe it carries over to our life. Also in the spiritual journey as human branches, we can look forward to celebrating in the fall season. After a summer of long, hot days and a lot of personal work and investment, we put out a lot of energy, we make sacrifices, but we know that maturing fruit is about to be harvested. And it can appear in the faces of people we touch, it can appear in some project that we're working on, or some cause that we're dedicated to that we see flourishing. So I wanted to show 2 pictures. I get in trouble when I do this because inevitably I drop something or whatever. But I just wanted to show you 2 pictures of fall in Napa. And I love the vantage point of which these photographs, the trellis, because it kind of resembles a bunch of crosses in a way. It kind of reminds me of that. But there's another one that I thought was absolutely beautiful too. Fall, I think, is one of the prettiest seasons if you live back east, and the fall colors are just breathtaking. Well, this is that kind of photo. Oops. So this one on the back, that's spring, and this is fall. And so there can be, evidence that harvest is coming. If you feel any of these things, you might be in a fall season or approaching fall. You realize you can see the light at the end of the tunnel with regards to a long-term goal. You have a growing anticipation and excitement to see the fulfillment of something that you worked so hard and longed for. You have the joy of seeing the harvest actually happen. A healthy baby born after 9 months of pregnancy, celebrating a son or daughter's graduation, or yours. You complete another season of ministry to children or adults and see growth in them. That also is an evidence of harvest in our lives. You have a flicker of a thought like, I wonder what it will be like now that I won't have this goal driving my energy. Because fall includes celebrating the harvest and letting go of the fruit. So sometimes this comes in the form of sending your children off to school. You have successfully raised them to the point of entering their school years or another year of school. Sometimes this can be something that you are working on as a project and you see the end in sight. And you have a gratitude towards God because you know He has not only given you the gifts to do whatever it is you've been working on, but He has been the one to empower you along the way. And so you have a sense that God is involved in this endeavor. These are things that bring us excitement and anticipation. Here's some words of wisdom for fall. Enjoy and celebrate your fall season and whatever good fruit looks like in your life. Include family and friends in your joy and your celebration. Be proud of what you have accomplished, and remember to thank God for His presence and power that kept you diligently working. Perhaps journal and date a prayer of gratitude to God, so you can look back on it and remember that. Maybe you'll be in a long summer or a long winter, and maybe you need to look back on that sometime. I remember this harvest, and there's going to be another one. So take some time also to enjoy rest and renewal before jumping into another job or responsibility. And, as a mom, of course, you can't really take a vacation from that. But you can give yourself little windows of rest as your schedule is. First of all, ask God for ways to take a rest, and then look for the ways that God brings your way. This is what I've done in every area of my life. When I told you I had a problem with making friends because we moved all the time, I would pray, Lord, please show me who might be a friend. And He always came through with wonderful people. And then I would have to trust Him again when I moved again until I got here. So we want to remember John 15:11. You didn't choose me, I chose you and appointed you to go and produce lasting fruit. So remembering that whatever God has set in your heart to do, He has chosen you and He has appointed you to go and bear fruit. So you're actually, in the harvest, you are fulfilling to the fullest that promise, and it's something to rejoice and thank God for. Going to move on into winter now. Winter sets in and the glory of the fall fades. And the vines look like they are withering, and the leaves turn brown. Some of them start to fall off. The vines are starting to look a little bedraggled. They sometimes can even look dead, but looks can be simply grown dormant. Their branches rest in the silence of winter. The life-giving sap comes out of the branches down into the root, and the branches rest. In the silence of the winter, the gardener does his best work. Keep this in your mind and heart for future reference. He's doing his best work because he is working to prune the vines back to prepare them for a new cycle of fruitfulness. And in the material I read, it says every vine keeper knows that the key to the next harvest is in winter. If you do not prune and prepare your vines properly, you are limiting your harvest. And so this is the time when the gardener is closest to the vines in terms of his care. By the end of winter, the ragged vineyard will be transformed because the gardener and his helpers have been working to heavily prune back the vines. When we drive by these places, you go, I don't think these things will ever be green again. Honestly, they're so barren looking, and they cut them way back. So those long trailing, beautiful lines of the vine in other seasons completely gone. I have one picture of winter, and it's a little deceiving because this is a picture of what they call old vines. Old vines aren't even on trellises anymore. In the United States, old vines are considered to be old vines that are 80 to 100 years old. Of course, in Israel, they're hundreds of years old, and in all around the Mediterranean, Italy, Greece, etc. But in America, 100 years. So that's what these are. And you are seeing them before they're pruned. So we see all those little sticks, kind of up in the air. Well, they're going to be cut off. They just haven't been pruned yet. They're just going into winter. In the life of a human branch, with the physical vineyard, in the winter seasons will arrive inevitably. You cannot really hold them back. You cannot avoid them. You can't squirm out of them, even though sometimes we would like to. But after a season of great productivity, we often experience a spiritual winter. The events and the circumstances of our lives shift to a lower gear. And we do many of the same activities we were doing when we were apparently looking so productive, but nothing seems as fruitful as it was before. You might have noticed this in your own life. You say, what is going on? Why does everything seem to be drying up? My opportunities, it seems like I'm doing the same, putting out the same effort, but I'm not getting much return. You may even fear that you might never be fruitful again. And please, there's only a few things that I care about you remembering, and one of them is this. There is always another season of fruitfulness if you submit to the Lord in whatever season you're in. Always. It's a promise. It's not a threat. It's a promise. It's not like, oh, well, I'll have to work so hard. No, the Lord will make it come to pass. The message we get from our modern world is we should be constantly producing work and products. Our machines are computers. We need to be running 24/7. In the language of the vineyard, it would be, we need to always be in harvest. And Wayne Jacobson speaks to this, and he said many Christians lose hope in their walk with God because they have transferred that belief over into their spiritual life. And when they don't see the same apparent fruit happening, they think they have failed God. They have, and somehow something is wrong with them. They may be resentful. Well, I'm doing everything and it's just not working the same way. But that's totally normal, and not to be concerned overly about this. We can't always be in harvest. As human beings, we are organic like the vineyard. We need to take our cues from the vineyard, not from our society. We are so far away from understanding nature and what it really takes to live on this earth compared to the first century, that we need to kind of go back to an earlier season and remember the way people lived in total dependence upon what happened in nature and what was going on around them. The winter is an outward barrenness and an exhaustion. Often you feel, oh gosh, I'm so tired. You possibly might experience sorrow, possibly from just the loss of your fruit, because maybe your identity became so entwined with your fruit that you don't know who you are now. You might experience just a lower energy level. So it also brings a time that gives us two benefits, two great gifts that are harder to experience in other seasons. And here they are. Quality time with God, because usually winter involves solitude of some sort and silence. More than other seasons. Take time in the Word and with fellowship and in prayer to cultivate and see this as an opportunity, not as a burden. This is my time to invest in my relationship with God and just, ask God, what would you have me, how would you have me focus? And He may give you the name of a book. He may give you something to study in the Word. He may give you someone to talk to that would help you through that season. You also receive the opportunity to rest and let God do His work of strengthening and restaging for a future season of growth. So those are two gifts that are not easy to obtain in other seasons. You're too busy. So you might be in winter if you're experiencing some of these things. You are fatigued from a long season of service or ministry at home, professionally, or as a volunteer. You're doing the same things you did when you were busy and productive, but things aren't coming together for you. You resist things slower and quiet. You just, push back against that and you fight it. You redouble your efforts to try to make something happen. I don't know if you've had that experience, but I have, and it's like hitting a wall. You might feel alone and somewhat isolated in your winter season. You might feel that no one else understands or has ever felt this way. This is part of the reason we're talking about the seasons, by the way, because I don't want anybody to leave this room ever thinking that they are the only one experiencing a transition and a change to a season that might be more difficult. Because I have had sudden changes in my life I couldn't control. And if I hadn't had lots of input from the Word and growth and friends and prayer, I would have been crushed under the weight of them. But you might feel, who am I now that I'm no longer productive? You might be depleted after the loss of someone important to you. Or after caregiving, and those things can go together. My husband cared for his wife I think they were married 33 years. 5 years into the marriage, she was diagnosed with a long-term autoimmune disease. And so he was always very tender and caring for her, making sure that she, got rest and ate correctly and all of that. But then the last 5 years of her life, he became like the sole caregiver. He relocated his job down here where their home was, closer. He changed companies so that he could work in Talega and drive home to take care of her. And it was something that he knew was coming, and he committed to that care. But it was still a great loss because he had seen it coming. And but somehow it's still a shock when it happens. But you might feel that way in your life, that perhaps you have been the one to care for a parent, a sibling, a relative, or a friend, and it can feel like winter afterwards. You're depleted because we need to do much more for caregivers in our lives. We really do, because sometimes the stress is even greater on them because they carry that responsibility. And but anyway, that's one idea about winter that you can file away, that might be an experience you have sometime, if not now, perhaps in the future. But there are some words of wisdom for winter. Don't try to fight your winter season, but receive it as part of God's work in your life. Ask God to show you His purposes in winter. Don't try to hang on to the glories of the past. For if you submit to the necessary pruning, you will see fruit happen again. So you don't need to hold on to the past. You can celebrate the past, but you don't need to hold on to it, because there will be more fruit coming. Embrace the quietness and the solitude provided in the winter. Intimacy with the Lord can develop during this time, as we mentioned before. I think this is really important, at least it is for me, so I just share it with you. Push back against the discouragement that can come in the winter. Redefine spiritual success from productivity, understanding that it goes beyond productivity and good works, to a deepening of your relationship with Jesus and resting in who He is. This is a fruit. This itself is a fruit. You might be thinking of fruit as something only that you do. No, the fruit is in your heart, because what is fruit? Any attitude, word, or action that speaks to the love and the goodness of God in the world. So if you're there in your room in your winter season and are trying to survive a time that you feel of solitude, just remember that is fruit. For you to be there with Him in faithfulness. It's easy to be faithful when a lot of exciting things are happening. You can be a cheerleader. I mean, whoo, you're excited, and it's good. It's a good thing. However, there are times when our focus must become more inward. And just like the vines, we need to be resting, refreshed, and restaged for a new season of growth. I wanted to read this verse from Matthew 11:28. It's very familiar to you, but in relationship to winter and needing rest. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. and just knowing that He is the generous giver of rest, and to include rich times with Him in our winter seasons. You know, God's plan is to see ever increasing fruit in our lives. We know it because John 15:2 says, "My Father the gardener prunes the branches that do bear fruit, so they will produce even more." There is always another season of growth and fruitfulness as long as we are deeply abiding in the vine. And it glorifies God for us to bear fruit and to continue to bear fruit. That speaks of His nature. So that is all I have to share this morning. And now we have an exciting part of our time this morning. We have two women that are going to share their stories of abiding in some seasons in their lives. And we have Tracy Russell, who will come first. And after Tracy shares her story, we will have a time of question and answer for her. And then we are going to trust God for a miracle of technology. And we are going to talk with our other story, who's going to be presented in video this morning at home because she has a brand new baby. So, and then we'll have a Q&A hopefully on the phone with her. So right now, we'll turn it over to Tracy.
Good morning, ladies. Good morning. We have a smaller group, so I it's the winter, right? And then what do you eat on Christmas? What did you all eat on Christmas? Ham. Ham, turkey. Okay. No, if you're from Miami, we had Cuban, we had arroz con pollo, we had all these things that just didn't seem like winter, right? But it's just what Helen said, and I want to affirm you so much in the season study because she is hitting so many spiritual truths. Winter is deceiving. Winter is deceiving because it's hard to tell, especially if you don't grow up with winters, or it's hard to tell when you're entering it. Winter looks a lot like death, right? Winter, I'm assuming that if you grew up, I grew up in Miami and everything was green in the winter. I had no idea that things get brown and they look like they're dying. And lastly, I like what she said, winter is dark. See, it was sunny where I was from. And when I got married, I didn't know it. I got married in the summer, but I was getting ready to enter a winter. So I got married on a beautiful sunny day in Miami, Florida, and I married the cutest guy on the beach with the crystal blue eyes that I looked into, and I saw forever. I saw forever in that guy's eyes. And we went, and we didn't know about divorce because his parents were married, my parents were married, our grandparents were married. There was no such thing as divorce in our family. So I had no idea what it looked like. But yet on my wedding day, I was entering winter. And I don't know if you all have entered a winter, but a spiritual winter looks a lot like death too. And it's a really deceiving time. because it's dark, but the lights can be right on. So we got married, and we got married in a beautiful wedding in front of 250 guests. And I thought I had married my forever guy. And we had gone to youth group together. We knew each other our whole lives. Our parents knew each other. And something was brewing. A storm was brewing inside my husband. And on the day we got married, I'll never forget leaving the ceremony, I thought, I did it. I married this awesome guy. I'm going to be loved for the rest of my life. And as we turned and we went on the highway to our honeymoon cruise, I looked over and my husband just looked really dark. And I thought, what in the world is going on? And so the honeymoon night, let's just say the temperature started to drop. It wasn't the warm thing I had expected. And when we boarded the honeymoon cruise, and we got on that cruise and we're unloading the things, and I'm putting in these negligees and all these things, and I'm so excited to love this man and have this romantic, passionate, warm, fun honeymoon cruise in the tropics, he turned to me and said, I don't know if I think we should have been married. And so I just pledged forever for a man in front of 250 people, and winter was happening to me. I didn't know what it looked like. So I called my mom during the cruise, and I thought, Mom, I think I'm in trouble. Like, something's going on. Mark's not acting right. He's seeming weird. What's going on? Oh, don't worry, honey. It's just wedding jitters. Don't worry. It's going to be fine. The sun's out. Don't worry. It's beautiful, right? It's the best time of your life. Go have fun. But it wasn't fun. And the tide quickly changed, and we went home, and we were opening gifts, and I was expecting this wonderful marriage. But my husband kept growing distant and darker. See, what Helen didn't mention is there's this concept called dormancy. I had no idea what that is. Nothing goes dormant in Miami. Dormancy. You know what I'm talking about? It's where on the surface everything goes really quiet, and that thing looks a whole lot like it's dying. But under the ground, there's all this activity. Dormancy. So I'm really alive, right? So that didn't make any sense to me. So I'm trying to love this man. I'm trying to keep bringing it on, and let's do some fun things, and let's be romantic, and all this stuff. And so 3 months into marriage, I'm thinking, I'm gonna make this work. And I started feeling a little sick. And I thought, what's going on here? And I went to the doctor, and he told me, you're pregnant. Oh my gosh, this is so exciting. And my husband walked out of that room and didn't even look at me. And he said, I didn't want to be a husband, and I certainly don't want to be a dad. And so again, winter was hitting. But see, there's something about winter that's really scary, is there's some young plants involved in winter, right? And we're always worried they're gonna get taken out during the frost. And so I called a friend of mine, an ex-boyfriend. I went right back to the ex-boyfriend, called up my attorney friend, and I said, I'm in trouble. I got to get out of this. Like, my husband doesn't want to be married. I'm in trouble. What can you do to help me? And he said, no problem. We're going to get an annulment for you. 3 months into marriage, we'll prove the marriage wasn't ever consummated. And I was in trouble because I knew I was pregnant. And for that split second, I could have made it all go away. But by the grace of God, I wasn't going to let those little plants get frosted and taken out in my winter, and not on my watch. And so I had that little baby, and I thought certainly that would turn him around, but it just came worse. Winter, wow, the sights and sounds of winter. It looks a lot like, and there could be more pictures I could give you, but it looks a lot like loving someone in my life that didn't love you back. It looks a lot like rejection. It looks a lot like watching somebody spiritually die that you really care about, watching somebody run away that's supposed to be there with you, watching somebody not turn around when you're screaming, turn around, I love you, don't you get it? And so I'll never forget, I have never shared this publicly, but I actually ran to so many people for help. And I went to this, I was in a small church, and this might surprise you, but I went to a woman, the pastor, I got counseling with the pastor's wife, that's all I could afford. And I was telling her this, and I was like, I don't know if I deserve this treatment, like something's wrong, I feel sick, I think something's wrong with my husband, like there's gotta be something. And she goes, you know what you deserve? You deserve hell. That's what we deserve as Christians. And I was like, oh my gosh, I deserve hell? And it just was like, yeah, you deserve this. Like, we all deserve hell. You don't deserve anything different. And see, the problem with what she told me is that's not what Jesus says. When something's sick, when something's dormant, when something's going wrong in our lives. There were these two women, Mary and Martha, and they went to Jesus when their brother Lazarus was dying, right? He was sick. And they said, Lord, the one you love is sick. And when Jesus heard this, he said, this sickness won't end in death. No, it's for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. And so Jesus knew a lot about winter, right? Because when somebody's dormant, the sickness is not going to end in death. It's for God's glory, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. And so that's always our hope in winter, is that when there's dormancy and when there's all these things happening, that God's glory is going to come through in you. And what I'm here to tell you is that dormancy is actually the deliverance of a vintage wine that you can't dream of or imagine. Dormancy is what Helen said. It produces, when it's done right, it has the potential to give rise to a vintage harvest. And the vintage harvest is the best one. Like, imagine wine enthusiast harvest, where you get the star on the bottle of wine, because that's a vintage wine. And a vintage wine gets sweeter with time. It's better with age. But for me, I had a problem, because as we know, Jesus is the vine and we're the branches. And guess what I turned into? I turned into Grapezilla, because I was completely out of control. And that's another issue with the vines that have to be pruned during winter, is they start growing out of control and all crazy. Because when I heard that there was unfaithfulness involved in my husband, and that's what was making him turn away from me, I went crazy. Crazy with anger, crazy with bitterness. I grew right away from the vine, and I was this branch that was going to lash out, was going to take control and prove I was a strong woman. And that woman's going to tell me I did. I was crazy. And I was so angry that I had been put in this situation. And how dare you do this to my son? And I deserve this. I mean, I was just crazy. I had read a book called Love Must Be Tough at this time, written by James Dobson. And the hard thing about a winter is there is a period of dormancy. And we can't control someone else's dormancy, right? And so we're not called to go in and to fix someone else's dormancy or to pull them out of dormancy. We're to believe that God can do something in that, right? God's glory is going to be revealed. But we can't become the branch ourselves that becomes Grapezilla in the process. Because guess what had to happen to me is I got pruned. And what's so cool about pruning is the only way that a branch can conform to the vine. And pruning is protection, because if you don't prune in the winter, the branches get a disease. I don't know a lot about this. This is all from a Google search. Look on Modern Farmer. That's where I got this content, because I don't know a lot. Shannon can attest to you, I don't know a lot about growing things. But I do know that if you get pruned in the winter and there's something God wants to take out of you, that it's because he's preventing a disease process that could actually enter into you later on. And again, dormancy is the deliverance of a vintage wine, right? Even in our life. So even when you're watching this person in this dormancy, there's something going on in you. So I got pruned. Basically, I got invited by a godly woman to a Bible study similar to this. I would have loved to have been invited to this Bible study, by the way. And she just worked with me as God started just kind of cutting away the lies that were tangling around my heart and the false beliefs that somebody had the power to permanently damage my life. And taking away the false belief that anger empowered me, it made me bitter. And you know, I've heard, speaking of the vintage wine that's being produced, in the process of your winter, the enemy is going to offer you a cup of bitterness. Think of a cup of wine or a cup of bitterness. And they say, bitterness is a cup you want to give to, like a poison. You want to give it to someone else and you end up drinking it yourself. And I was literally drinking in the poison, but I was so conflicted because I was a believer in Jesus. And I was just like these women. I was like, I know you can heal him. I know, but it looks a lot like winter here. God, like he's dying. I don't get it. Everything's dying around me. But I love what Jesus says later on. I am the resurrection, and I am the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? So the Lord was going to resurrect me in the process, and he was going to eliminate and prune away the bitterness and all this. And I want to tell you about the story of how that happened. It worked over many, many weeks and months because I did end up divorcing my husband. In my power and in my own strength, I literally was like, I'm not doing it anymore. And I became a bitter, bitter woman. And what happened was my ex-husband that I could never get to Bible study, that never wanted to have a family or a wife, goes to a Bible study. He gets roped into it. You couldn't get these guys off of him. He sits in a Bible study, and someone says, I'm so sorry, our main speaker is not here. All I've got is my testimony. And this man shared his story, and it was exactly what my ex-husband needed to hear. And he became a believer on the spot in our divorce. So now I've got my ex-husband who becomes a believer. I'm a believer, and I'm caught up in Grapezilla, right? And I'm getting pruned, but I couldn't believe winter's deceiving, right? It's like, wait a minute, I thought we were in winter and now there's a spring coming or a harvest in here? What is going on here? I just didn't get it. I'm the girl from Miami that doesn't know seasons. And so this is what it started to look like when my husband went into a different season. He gave me everything he owned during our divorce. Wouldn't contest it. Gave me everything he owned. He wouldn't move off my street. He lived in an apartment on my street. I lived in a house with our son Chase. He wouldn't move off my street. He lived in an apartment. He had a bed, he had a lawn chair, and a guitar. He gave me everything. He called up every single person I knew, including my family and friends, and said, I am so sorry. I was wrong. Please forgive me. I own it. And he got cussed out by every single person. And he still said, you know what? God's changed me, and I don't blame you for feeling that way. I want to ask you to forgive me. And I was like, I'll quit with the show. Come on, buddy. Like, really, you're going to do this now that I'm this bitter, hateful woman? But it got worse. He went to his mother, and he asked her to make him a baby book and recalibrate the first year of our son's life. And every time I wanted to go out, he said, let me take Chase. Let me take him. I'm right down the street. And I would show up for this man that I thought was just a stump. And my husband is good looking. I think he's the most handsome man in the world. But this time, I swear to you, that man looked like death to me. I was like, you are ugly. I can't stand you. You are ugly. You are just a dormant. You know what? And I would go to his house, and I would see this beautiful praise music playing. And I would hand our son over, and I'd be like, oh, man. Like Jesus was showing up in the dormancy. The sickness will not end in death. No, it's for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. So who's dormant in your life right now? Who's dormant? And where are you tempted to be Grapezilla? Because I get it. That's what I was at that point. But God loved me, and he just worked through women's Bible study and worked through this woman and worked through this woman. And I want to tell you about a turning point, because if you've ever been entrusted with a winter, like Helen said, it's so deceiving that you almost start doubting yourself. You don't even know if the changes are coming. You don't know, are we in a harvest now, Lord? Is this someone I should trust? Is what's going on? And so there was one night that my husband came over, my ex-husband at the time, and he owed me an alimony check. And he was on his way to a thing called Promise Keepers. Have y'all heard about Promise Keepers? It was a big movement. And he opened his wallet and he said, here's your alimony check. And I looked at his wallet and he had a picture of us from our wedding day. So he had a picture of us with the beautiful palm trees in Miami, with the beautiful summer day. And that looked like winter to me. And I was like, hey, get rid of the picture. Give me my alimony check, and don't let the door kick you on the way out. Have fun at Promise Breakers. Goodbye. And he was like, he looked at me with those beautiful crystal blue eyes, and he said, you know what? One day God's going to show you I've changed. And I was like, really? Have fun. Bye. So he went his way. He went to Promise Keepers. It was a big rally in Washington, D.C. I don't know if you've heard of it. I mean, it turned out to be this million-man thing, right? And I was on my way to a wedding, which if you're ever in a winter and you go to a wedding, or if you're ever struggling with a kid, you go to bed, it's just like the worst thing in the world. But I was on my way to a wedding. I had to drive from Tampa, Florida to Miami, going back for this wedding. And I was in the car with my mom and my son, and the radio was playing. And all I could hear was this beautiful praise music. There's an area called Alligator Alley where you drive down and you get very few radio receptions. And the man was talking and he said, you know, some of you have been through a really hard time, but this I hold against you. You've turned your back on your first love. And I went, oh my gosh. Like here I always thought Mark was my first love, and I was so mad because he turned on me, that God was designed to be my first love, not Mark. And so in that car in the middle of nowhere with the alligators on the alley, I started repenting. And I was like, God, I'm so sorry. And I just saw myself again, like that woman strangling a dormant, branch when I was Grapezilla myself. And the radio changed and said quickly, this is all being broadcasted live from Promise Keepers. And so I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I'm listening to Promise Keepers. We're broadcasting live from Washington, D.C. Now, men, we're going to talk about marriages. Oh, hey, how are you? Okay, we're going to turn this off. So anyways, my husband, they said, men, you have sinned against the wife of your youth. And I could hear men going, like crying, wailing. They're like, get down on your knees, get out a picture of your wife from your wallet, because today is the day that God's going to make you the husband and the father you were called to be. And you could hear, rumble, 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 rumble. And I thought, there's no way this is happening. And they're like, hold that picture up to God, because that is the picture of what God is going to restore in your life. God is going to make you that husband and father now. And I could even hear Tony Evans in my mind. You ever heard of Tony Evans? Get back up, man. You were like Rocky. You were down for the count, but the enemy has you down, but get up. Now you strike one, strike two. You ain't going to stay down. Get back up. You go back. I mean, I was like, oh my gosh, so true. Get up, get up. And then I thought, this is not happening. I arrived in Fort Lauderdale. And I thought, there's no way. And I went out that night to a wedding, and I met a cute guy, and I thought, that never happened. And I saw a friend of mine, and he goes, Tracy, I just so don't want you to be hurt. Like, please don't believe that kind of stuff. Because I told him, I said, you're not going to believe that. And he goes, please don't believe that again. Mm-hmm. Ladies, if you're in a winter, people are going to tell you, you're still in the winter. But Jesus said, no, it's for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. So the next day I was driving home, and I got a call from Mark from Washington, D.C. And he said, hey, Tracy, he said, how are you doing? How's Chase? I said, great. He said, I've always wondered why I kept a picture of you in my wallet. And he said, yesterday God showed me why. And he said, I want to talk to you about it when I get home. And I was like, oh my gosh, I know exactly why you have the picture of the wallet. And so that night he came in, and I was in our bed, and he came in, and he got down on his knees. And he just said, I so blew it. I was not the husband and the father I was meant to be. He goes, but I want to love you, and I want to love our son. And he was like, will you please trust Christ in me? Like, don't trust me. I'm asking you to trust Christ in me. And the spring was in his eyes. It was like seeing the Lord, like shining. This man that was dead, the season was changing, and something was open. And I said, yes, I will. And that was a scary time, because I didn't know at that time what it was going to be. But I knew that my first love, as I prayed a lot after that, I knew that my first love told me, like, this last one day, 10 days, 10 years, I am calling you to love this man and to restore your family and to forgiveness. And honestly, ladies, the best part of my story is not that I remarried my ex-husband. The story for me is that God resurrected me from Grapezilla and trained me that he was my first love. Because honestly, that was a sidebar. That my husband, it could have been another marriage or another, but it wasn't that. It was that he did that for me. Like, he totally conformed me to the vine. Because I could never have grown again without him, right? Apart from me, you can't do anything. So I couldn't do anything without him. So fast forward, in the middle of the night, we went back to my uncle that married us the first time in front of 250 guests. And We got married in shorts and skirts, and we went in, no flowers, nobody would really come because everyone was like, I'm not really sure about this. So that was great. But Jesus said, no, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. And that night, we got married, we were holding hands, we were crying our eyes out, bawling, practically on our knees. My uncle that married us the first time married us in the middle of the night with nobody around, nobody that would come. I think he had a fake flower arrangement, and I grabbed it and was like, this is my wedding bouquet. I mean, there was nothing. But when we drove home that night in the stars, it was just beautiful stars. And I was like, oh, Lord, thanks for my wedding ceremony. It was just beautiful. He saw. And so that marriage, that winter, produced a remarriage, a deliverance of vintage wine that's lasted 22 years. The marriage that nobody saw, the marriage that no one attended, but Jesus was going to be resurrected. And so the Son of God may be glorified through it. And so there were going to be more children that I was going to experience him holding me for and crying, and there were going to be more ways to love each other. But it was a vintage wine that was coming. So the dormancy in your life or in someone else's life is really the deliverance and the rise to a vintage wine. It's sweeter with time. It's better with age. So I want to give you all a little star, because if you're, I'm not a wine enthusiast, but apparently if you're a wine enthusiast and you get a big old star on your wine bottle, that's like vintage. So I want to give you all, I'm going to pass these around. I want you to put this little star up, and when you're tempted to believe that there's a death, that there's you're being deceived, it's dark, it looks like death, I want you to remember that a vintage wine is on the way. Maybe not in someone else's life, but in yours. And yes, maybe even that there might be a resurrection in someone else's life too. So that's my story, and I want each one of you to have one of these.
We're going to have a couple of, we have about 8-10 minutes to have some Q&A. Tracy, what a blessing your story is. I've heard it, but I haven't heard it in all of its glory.
Oh, man. Well, that's the first time I've told it with wine.
That's okay, we're studying it.
Okay, I know. Yes, I get to be wine enthusiast for Jesus. There you go.
Absolutely. I just wonder, it could raise, her story could, have caused some insider questions or whatever that you might have that you might want to ask Tracy during this next little while here.
It's powerful. I mean, all I can say, I can't question. I just can say, praise God.
Right.
Yeah.
Praise Him.
Yeah.
You can do it.
Wonderful.
I just was wondering how he revealed himself as his first love, when it was just you and him in that honeymoon season. Like, what are some ways that he showed himself to you? Jesus, yeah.
Well, here's the thing about winter being deceiving is, and thank you for asking me that.
That's
Thank
like,
you.
I love,
Because you know what?
that.
Yeah, I mean, I had to go really fast. But like, there was never a time I was alone. Like, every night, I'm so afraid of the dark and being left alone. Every night I felt like God talked to me in. Like, I have never felt, when I really did tough love, that minute that I finally read James Bobson's book, I told Mark, like, I love you, I will always honor our marriage vows, but if you don't want to be married, you need to go, and you need to leave. And he said, yeah, I need to go. I know what it would take. I would have to become a Christian, and I'm never becoming a Christian. And I should have known then that that wasn't going to happen. But when he left, I had overwhelming peace come over me. I had literally never sensed the presence of God so tangibly over me in my life. I had that Christian woman. He sent in the troops. He sent in a Christian woman. He sent in friends to support me during that time. I had a family. And you want to know how else I felt the first love of God is? My mother-in-law and father-in-law ministered to me the entire time. My mother and father-in-law watched my son while I went back to work, picked him up, handed me a coffee, and left me diapers every night after I worked. And I had divorced their son, and I was the bitter snake that was like, and it's his fault too, and don't try to tell me it's different. And my mother-in-law was so sweet to me. But God kept like ministering to me. Like, you cannot outrun God's love in that dormancy, because like even I'd be at work, for an example, I'd be at work and I was really struggling with trust and love, because I'm like, Lord, I know I love you and I know the Bible's true, but like it just hurts me that like you made me go through a winter. Like it's kind of like Mary and Martha. It's like, but like, where were you? Like, if you were to have been here, our brother wouldn't have died. Like, I don't get you right now, God. Seriously, that hurt. And I was walking across the street and I put my hand on a telephone pole just because I was out at work and I had to go to lunch. And I felt my finger and I went, oh my gosh, there's something in there. And out of the telephone pole, I pulled out a little tract and it said, do you know how much God loves you? And I opened it up and I was like, no. And it said, the Bible is actually his love letter to you. From start to finish, God is showing you how much he's faithful in your story. Like, he who began the good work is going to be faithful to complete it. You can trust him. You don't have to trust the people in your story. Trust his story of love for you. And I was like, oh my gosh, you know, or the fact that I didn't know there were Christian coworkers that I had in the hospital, because I was a therapist, a young therapist, and this guy was a Christian and he kept talking to me. And on the final day when I walked out the door and I was like, I gotta leave my job. I know this is crazy. I'm getting remarried. I'm gonna have a family. I'm gonna marry my ex-husband. This is so crazy, but God's done something. He goes, Tracy, I've been praying for you the whole time that you'd walk out that door and go back to him.
Oh, wow.
The woman that got me into Bible study faked me out because she told me that she wanted me to do a Bible study so I could remarry a cool guy. And she said, I always believed Mark was genuine, but I didn't want to tell you that. So I just got you in Bible study so God could reveal it to you. That kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Like the Lord was there putting his people, places, messages. That's why I'm so passionate about creative messages, because every time I needed a message, God was there. Like, I love you. I've got you. The only time I struggled was when I stepped out into Grapezilla and started dating other men, because that was immediately turned me into a crazy person, because I was like, I'm gonna find it myself, I'm gonna get it myself, I'm gonna find this guy who's gonna love me and treat me right. That's when the problem started. But if I just stayed, like she had said, you know, the quiet, know the sap is, you know, stay quiet and stay connected, then I felt God's presence. I just didn't like my winter, and I wanted to solve it in my own strength.
But what a great demonstration to people about a difficult winter and how you learned how to go through a winter by, you know, struggling through a winter, you know. It's a great encouragement. Really great. Okay, Danielle.
What's the name of the book again that you read by James Joyce?
Love must be tough.